My parents were handing out Disney tickets to all the grandkids, one by one, with that cheerful family party kind of vibe. When it was my son's turn, my dad looked down at the stack in his hand and said, "I think we miscounted." Instead of fixing it, they just laughed and gave the 2 leftover tickets to a couple of random kids wearing Mickey tiaras. My son just stood there, watching, not really understanding what was happening. I didn't say anything. I just watched as a pair of strangers walked by and happily took the extra tickets. My son was still holding the lemonade I had bought for him, gripping it like it was the only thing he had left. My sister clapped her hands together, telling everyone to gather for a group photo. I watched as all the cousins lined up, waving their Disney tickets in the air like trophies. Mason looked up at me, confused, waiting for me to tell him what to do. I told him we didn't need a picture. After the photo, Mom came over with her same practiced warmth, asking if we were doing okay. I told her we were fine. She didn't notice my voice shaking. Or maybe she did and just decided to ignore it. When it was time to leave, Mason asked if he could still wear his Mickey shirt for bed. He said maybe Grandpa would find another ticket later. I told him maybe, but I knew better. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat on the couch scrolling through photos my sister had already posted online. Everyone smiling, hashtags about family first, and best grandparents ever. I stared at those pictures for a long time, wondering when I'd stopped expecting them to treat me, or my son, like we were part of that story. Still, something inside me started to shift that night. I didn't know it yet, but that small moment, that single ticket that should have gone to Mason, would unravel everything I thought I'd accepted about my family. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing nonstop. My family group chat was blowing up with messages, pictures of suitcases, hotel confirmations, emojis of Mickey ears. Everyone was giddy. It was like that ticket incident had never even happened. I scrolled through the messages until I saw my mom's text. "Remember to bring sunscreen for the kids. Can't wait for our big family trip." She had tagged everyone. Everyone except me. I stared at that message for a while, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. There was this urge to say something sharp, something that would finally make them feel the sting they'd ignored last night. But then I glanced over at Mason, sitting on the floor with his cereal, trying to build a castle out of Legos. He was humming to himself, peaceful, unaware. And suddenly, starting a fight felt useless. I told myself maybe it was just an oversight. Maybe Mom had meant to tag me and forgot. She forgets things all the time. Birthdays, school recitals, every single thing that isn't about my sister's perfect kids. Later that day, I called her. She sounded cheerful, too cheerful. She talked about hotel rates, the breakfast buffet, how excited the grandkids were. When I mentioned Mason, there was a pause, tiny but heavy. Then she said, "Oh, honey, I thought you weren't coming. You didn't say anything last night." I wanted to remind her that she hadn't given us a ticket, that she'd literally handed ours to 2 random girls she didn't even know, but the words got stuck in my throat again. Instead, I just said we'd figure something out. After I hung up, I sat there on the couch for a long time, staring at the spot on the wall where Mason's kindergarten picture hung slightly crooked. The house felt too quiet, like the silence itself was waiting for me to admit something I'd been avoiding for years, that this wasn't about a ticket. It never was. When I was a kid, things were always divided that way. My sister Amanda was the golden one, confident, loud, the kind who never asked for permission. I was quieter, more cautious. My parents used to joke that Amanda lit up every room while I kept things grounded. It sounded harmless then, but when you hear that kind of thing your whole life, it starts to sound like a hierarchy. After the Disney tickets, something inside me cracked open. I stopped pretending I didn't notice the small slights, the way my mom only complimented Mason when comparing him to someone else, or how Dad always said, "You're doing your best," in that tone that sounded more like pity than praise. That night, Mason asked if Grandma and Grandpa were still going to Disney. I told him yes, and he nodded. He asked if maybe we could go to the zoo instead. It hit me how easy it was for him to adjust, to accept being left out, like it was normal, like he'd already learned it from watching me. I went online and looked up zoo tickets, but as I did, my mom's Facebook post popped up again. She'd uploaded a picture of all the grandkids holding their Disney tickets, captioned, "Can't wait for memories that will last a lifetime." There were 9 kids in the photo. Mason wasn't one of them. And in the comments, Amanda wrote, "So blessed, best parents ever." That was the first time in years I let myself cry. Not because of anger, but because I realized how small they'd made us feel, over and over, until we started to believe we deserved it. But here's the thing. When you finally see it clearly, when you stop making excuses for people who keep showing you who they are, something changes. And I was about to change too. A week later, I got a text from Amanda. She said Mom wanted everyone to meet at her house that Sunday before the trip, just to go over final details. I stared at the message, debating if I should even show up. I already knew what family meetings meant. My mom holding court in the kitchen while everyone else agreed with her like it was a performance. But then I thought about Mason. He still asked, every couple of days, if Grandpa had found his ticket yet. I figured showing up might at least give me a chance to say something. Or maybe I just wanted to see if they'd noticed the hurt they caused. When we got there, the house smelled like cinnamon candles and coffee, the same scent it always had when I was a kid. Mason went straight to play with the other cousins. My mom was at the counter, slicing fruit, her bracelets clinking against the cutting board. Amanda was beside her, showing her some new apps she used to organize their Disney itinerary. They looked like a team, like they always did. My dad came over, patted Mason's head, and said, "Hey, champ." He didn't mention the ticket. Didn't mention anything, actually. Just went back to the living room to watch football. I waited for a while, trying to find the right moment to bring it up. But every time I opened my mouth, Mom or Amanda would start another conversation. Something about fast passes or which restaurants had the best character breakfasts. It was like the whole house was built to drown me out. Finally, I just said it. I told Mom that Mason never got his ticket, that I didn't think it was fair how it happened. She froze for a second, then laughed softly, like I'd just said something embarrassing. She said, "Oh, honey, don't make this a thing. You know we love Mason. It was just a small mix-up. A small mix-up." Amanda chimed in, saying maybe I'd misunderstood, that Dad had meant to reorder more but probably forgot. I reminded her that I was there, that I saw them hand the extra tickets to strangers. My mom's smile faded, and she said something about how I always hold on to the negative stuff. That line, it hit a nerve I didn't even know was still raw. Always hold on to the negative stuff. I didn't yell, I just stood there, shaking, and said I wasn't trying to be negative. I was trying to make sure my son wasn't invisible in his own family. Mom sighed and told me I was being dramatic. Amanda rolled her eyes. That was the moment I realized there was no fixing it. Not because they didn't understand, but because they didn't care to. I gathered Mason's things quietly. He looked confused when I told him we were leaving. My mom didn't stop me. She just said, "If you change your mind, you know where we'll be." As I drove home, Mason fell asleep in the back seat, clutching his Mickey shirt. I watched him in the rearview mirror, and something in me hardened. I wasn't going to let him grow up thinking this was normal, thinking that being treated as an afterthought was something to accept. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. I started looking at flights, not to Disney, but somewhere else. Somewhere quiet, just for the two of us. I didn't even know where yet. I just needed to break the pattern, to stop waiting for people who were never going to show up for us. Before I went to bed, I deleted myself from the family group chat. No message, no explanation. Just gone. 2 days later, Amanda posted a picture of their packed suitcases. The caption read, "Family means everything. So grateful." And for the first time, seeing it didn't hurt. It just made things clear. They were a family, yes. Just not mine anymore. The morning they left for Disney, I woke up to silence. No buzzing group chats, no reminders about packing lists or sunscreen, just the soft sound of Mason breathing beside me. He'd crawled into my bed sometime during the night, clutching that same Mickey shirt like it still meant something. I made pancakes. I tried to make the morning feel like any other, but my hands kept trembling when I flipped them. Mason asked if Grandma would send pictures. I told him probably. He nodded, his expression calm in that way only kids can manage, like he'd already learned to lower his expectations before they had a chance to disappoint him. By noon, their pictures started showing up online. My mom in a sun hat, holding a churro. Amanda's kids posing with Goofy. Dad with all the grandkids lined up behind him. All except Mason, of course. The caption said, "All together at last." I didn't cry this time. I just stared at that caption until it blurred, then set my phone face down on the counter. That afternoon, I asked Mason if he wanted to go somewhere special. Just us. He perked up immediately. We ended up driving 2 hours to a little coastal town I'd visited once in college. Nothing fancy. Just a strip of beach, a couple of diners, and a motel with faded blue doors. When we got there, Mason ran straight to the sand. The wind was sharp, the sky gray, but he didn't care. He ran in circles, laughing, like he'd been waiting to breathe for weeks. I sat on the bench and watched him. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about who was missing from the picture. I was thinking about who was right there. My kid. The one person who still looked at me like I was enough. We spent the evening eating burgers in a diner that smelled like salt and grease. The waitress brought Mason an extra scoop of ice cream, just because, and he grinned so wide I thought my heart might burst. When we got back to the motel, I checked my phone again. There were a few missed calls from my mom, a text that said, "We noticed you left the group chat. Everything okay?" I didn't reply. Not out of anger. I just didn't have anything left to say that would make them see it. Some people only hear you when you agree with them. That night, while Mason slept, I sat outside on the balcony, watching the waves crash in the distance. My mom's voice kept echoing in my head, "Don't make this a thing." But it already was a thing, not because of the tickets, but because of every moment they'd made me feel like I had to earn basic kindness. The next morning, I took a picture of Mason sitting on the beach, holding a seashell to his ear. His smile was small but real. I posted it with a caption, "Not Disney, but perfect for us." It wasn't meant to be a statement, but when Amanda commented a single question mark and Mom sent a thumbs up emoji, I realized they'd taken it as one anyway. I didn't respond. I just turned my phone off. Later, as we packed up, Mason asked if we could come back someday. I told him yes, absolutely. He said it was the best weekend ever. Driving home, I realized something simple but powerful. Sometimes walking away isn't about proving a point. It's about protecting the part of yourself that's still trying to love honestly. And from that weekend on, I stopped waiting for my parents to see me. I stopped hoping they'd change, because maybe they never would, but I could. A few days after we got back, I found a voicemail from my mom. Her tone was the same one she used when trying to sound reasonable, like she was offering peace after a misunderstanding she didn't cause. She said she missed Mason, that it wasn't right for us to skip the family trip, and that she hoped I wasn't holding on to that silly ticket thing. I didn't delete the message right away. I just let it sit there, like a test I didn't want to take. Mason was in the living room, sprawled on the rug with his toys, humming to himself. He was fine. He was happy. That was all I needed to know. But the more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. They'd just spent a week making memories with everyone else, and now that the photos were up and the trip was over, they suddenly missed us. It wasn't guilt. It was performance. A few nights later, Amanda called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. She started with small talk. How exhausting the trip had been. How the kids loved it. How Mom felt bad you didn't come. Then she got to the point. She said Mom wanted to host a makeup dinner at their house that weekend, so Mason wouldn't feel left out. I asked her what that meant. She said Mom thought it would be nice to give him a small souvenir moment, maybe a Mickey toy or something. She sounded proud, like it was a generous idea. I told her no. Calmly. Just no. There was a long pause. Then she said I was blowing things out of proportion, that it wasn't healthy to alienate Mason from his family. I said maybe it wasn't healthy to keep teaching him that love comes with conditions. She didn't reply, just hung up. That night, I lay awake thinking about how many times I'd been talked into keeping peace by swallowing pain. I thought about all the moments I'd let slide, the comments, the favoritism, the quiet digs disguised as jokes. I'd always told myself it wasn't worth starting a fight, but what I hadn't realized was that every time I stayed quiet, I was agreeing to it. The next morning, I sat down with Mason at breakfast and told him we were going to start some new traditions. Just ours. I didn't say why. He didn't ask. He just smiled and said, "Can we make pancakes every Sunday?" And that became our thing. No big announcements, no explanations, just us carving out a version of family that actually felt safe. Weeks passed, and for the first time in years, the silence from my parents felt peaceful instead of heavy. Until one afternoon in early spring, I got a message from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Dad. Can we talk?" He never texted. Ever. Not unless Mom told him to. Curiosity won again, so I called back. His voice was softer than I expected. He said he wanted to stop by, that he'd been thinking about things. Against my better judgment, I said okay. When he showed up, he looked older, smaller even. He sat at my kitchen table, glancing around like he didn't recognize the place. He said Mom had been upset, that she didn't mean to make Mason feel left out. Then he said something that caught me off guard. "You know your mom. She just doesn't know how to be wrong." I didn't know how to respond. He looked tired when he said, "You were always the one who tried to make things okay. I see that now." Then he took out a small envelope and pushed it toward me. 2 Disney tickets, still valid. I didn't take them. He said he thought it might make things right. I told him it wasn't about that. He nodded, like he'd expected me to say it. Before he left, he looked at Mason's drawings on the fridge and said, "You're doing a good job with him." That was the first time I'd ever heard those words from him. When the door closed, I stood there staring at that envelope. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was something. Maybe the only thing he knew how to offer. I threw the tickets away that night, not out of anger, just to make space for something new. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to fix what was broken. I was just trying to build something better. A few weeks after Dad's visit, spring started to settle in. The air felt softer, the days stretched longer, and for once my weekends didn't feel like countdowns to another family obligation. Mason and I had found our rhythm. Quiet mornings, movie nights, our Sunday pancake tradition. He'd stopped asking about Disney. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how far we'd come. Kids don't forget being left out, but they learn to adapt faster than adults do. Sometimes that broke my heart a little, realizing he'd had to grow resilient so young. One afternoon, while I was cleaning up after lunch, my phone buzzed. It was a photo from Dad, a picture of him and Mom at a restaurant both smiling. The caption said, "Miss you two. Hope to see you soon." I stared at it for a long time, unsure what to feel. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was more like distance, the kind that comes after a long storm when you finally step outside and realize you survived it. That evening, while Mason colored at the table, he asked if Grandma and Grandpa were mad at us. I hesitated before answering. I told him no. They just didn't understand things the same way we did. He nodded, satisfied with that. Then he said he liked it better when it was just us. I wanted to cry. Not because of sadness, but because he said it like a truth I'd been too afraid to admit myself. A few days later, Amanda texted me again. Her message was short. "Mom's been sick. She won't say anything, but Dad told me. You should call." My first reaction was disbelief, then guilt, quick and sharp. I hadn't seen my mother in almost 2 months. I didn't know what sick meant. Amanda didn't explain. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the last time I'd seen her, the way she'd waved me off like I was being dramatic, the way she hadn't looked twice at Mason when we walked out the door. But I also thought about Dad's words, how she didn't know how to be wrong. I wasn't sure if sickness would change that. In the morning, I called. Dad answered. His voice sounded strained, like he'd been awake all night. He said Mom had been having chest pains, that she was at the hospital for tests. I asked if she was okay. He said they didn't know yet. Then he said something I didn't expect. "She keeps asking if you're mad at her." I didn't know how to respond. By the time I got to the hospital, it was late afternoon. She was sitting up in bed, pale but alert, with her hair pulled back and a blanket over her lap. When she saw me, she smiled. Small, unsure, but real. There was a silence between us that stretched too long. Then she said she'd been thinking a lot, that maybe she'd gotten some things wrong. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, my throat tight, trying to read if she meant it. Then she looked at me and said quietly, "I don't know why I do it. I just always wanted to be the one everyone needed." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her. We talked for a while, awkward but honest. She asked about Mason, said she missed his laugh. I told her he was okay, that we were okay. Before I left, she said, "Next time, bring him, please." I said I would think about it. When I got home, Mason was asleep on the couch, his drawing book open beside him. On the page, he'd drawn the two of us. Stick figures, holding hands, under a sun with a big crooked smile. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel torn between anger and love. I just felt tired, but lighter too. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her, but maybe I didn't need to rush that. Maybe it was enough that I'd stopped pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Because healing, I was starting to realize, wasn't about making them change. It was about finally believing that I deserved better, and making sure Mason grew up knowing that too. A week after visiting the hospital, I took Mason back to see my mom. He'd been excited all morning, picking out one of his favorite shirts and asking if Grandma still made those cookies with the chocolate centers. I told him she probably would, though I honestly didn't know if she had the strength for baking anymore. When we got there, the house felt different, quieter, like something in it had softened. Mom was sitting on the couch with a blanket over her knees, and Dad hovered nearby, making sure she didn't overdo anything. Mason ran to her without hesitation, and she hugged him tight, longer than I'd ever seen her hold anyone. She told him she'd been resting because her heart needed a little break. He nodded like that made perfect sense. Then he sat beside her and started showing her his drawings. She laughed, a soft, unguarded laugh that made her seem younger for a moment. I watched them from the doorway. My stomach knotted with a mix of love and resentment. It was hard to know which feeling belonged more. When Mason went outside with Dad to feed the birds, Mom motioned for me to sit. She said she wanted to talk. She told me the doctors had mentioned stress, that maybe she'd been carrying more than she realized. Then, after a long pause, she said she'd been thinking about that night with the Disney tickets. I didn't interrupt. She said she didn't know why she did it, why she gave them to those girls instead of just admitting she'd made a mistake. Then she looked down and said, "I think I just didn't want anyone to see me mess up, not even for a second." Her voice cracked when she said she was sorry, not just for that night, but for a lot of other moments too. Times she'd made me feel small because she was too proud to say she was wrong. I sat there quietly. I didn't forgive her right away. How could I? But for the first time, she wasn't defending herself. She was just admitting it, and that was new. When Mason came back in, Mom asked if he'd like to come over again soon. He nodded eagerly, and I told her we'd figure something out. On the drive home, Mason was unusually quiet. After a while, he asked if Grandma was going to be okay. I told him she'd be fine, that she just needed to rest and worry less. He thought for a moment, then said, "Maybe we can make her pancakes next time, like ours." It made me smile, because that was him. Kind, hopeful, already offering to share the best part of our new life. That night, after putting him to bed, I sat in the kitchen and thought about everything that had led us here. For so long, I'd been waiting for an apology that might never come, and now that it had, I realized I didn't want revenge or validation. I just wanted peace. I opened my phone and typed a message to Mom. "Thanks for talking today. Mason had a good time." She replied almost immediately. "I did too. I hope we can start over." I didn't know what starting over meant yet, but maybe it didn't have to mean pretending nothing had happened. Maybe it just meant trying again. This time without the weight of old patterns pressing down on every moment. Before going to bed, I checked on Mason one more time. He was asleep, his hand still resting on his sketchbook. On the page, there were 3 stick figures this time. Him, me, and Grandma, standing under that same crooked sun. And for the first time in years, that image didn't hurt. It just felt possible. The next few weeks felt strange. Quiet, but not empty. My mom started calling every few days just to check in. The conversations were short, awkward at first, but genuine. She asked about Mason's school, his art projects, even what shows he liked to watch. It was like she was learning how to be present, one small question at a time. Dad kept things simple. He'd text me photos of birds in their backyard, or send videos of him fixing something around the house. It was his version of an apology, I think. Steady, wordless effort. Mason loved the attention. He'd get excited whenever Grandma called, proudly showing her his drawings over FaceTime. Sometimes, after the call ended, he'd ask if she was better now. I'd tell him she was getting there, and maybe she was. One Sunday, she invited us over for lunch. I hesitated before saying yes, but Mason was already bouncing around the living room, talking about the cookies she used to make, so we went. The moment we walked in, I noticed small changes. There were fewer photos of Amanda's family on the shelves. Not gone, but balanced. And on the kitchen counter, there was a plate of those same chocolate-centered cookies, still warm. Mom hugged Mason first, then me. It wasn't a long hug, but it felt different. Not performative, not stiff. Just real. We ate together at the dining table, something we hadn't done in months. The food was simple. Sandwiches, fruit salad, lemonade. Mason talked non-stop about his drawings, his new friend at school, his dream of having a pet turtle. Mom listened, smiling the whole time. At one point, she looked at me and said quietly, "I've been thinking about what kind of grandmother I want to be." Then she looked at Mason and added, "And I don't want to miss any more chances." I didn't say much, just nodded, but something eased in me then. Maybe she really was trying. After lunch, while Mason helped Dad feed the birds again, Mom handed me a small envelope. My chest tightened for a second, thinking it might be more Disney tickets. But when I opened it, there was just a photo inside. An old picture of me and Amanda as kids, both in matching mini ears, grinning at the camera. Mom said she'd found it while cleaning the attic. "I looked at it for a long time," she said. "You were always trying to make everyone smile. I should have told you how much that meant." It wasn't a perfect moment, but it was enough. On the drive home, Mason talked about how Grandma had promised to come to his next art show. I told him that sounded nice. He said maybe we could all go get ice cream after. For the first time, that idea didn't fill me with anxiety. It actually sounded okay. That night, I looked at the old photo again before tucking it into a drawer. I didn't know if Mom and I would ever have the relationship I used to hope for, but I was done waiting for perfect. Because now I understood something simple. You don't rebuild family by pretending the cracks never happened. You rebuild it by deciding which parts are still worth holding on to. And this time, I wasn't holding on out of guilt. I was choosing it. Summer came fast that year. School let out, the air thickened with humidity, and Mason's laughter seemed to fill every room of the house. For the first time in a long while, life felt steady. Not perfect, not dramatic, just steady. Mom kept her promise. She came to Mason's art show. She sat in the front row, hands folded, smiling through every presentation. When Mason pointed to his painting, a bright, messy ocean scene he called Our Beach Trip, she clapped so loudly people turned to look. Afterward, she told him it was beautiful. He beamed, shy but proud. Then she turned to me and said, "You're raising him right. No defensiveness, no hint of competition with Amanda, just sincerity. It shouldn't have meant so much, but it did." That weekend, we all went for ice cream like Mason had wanted. Even Dad came, though he barely said anything. He just watched us quietly, smiling now and then. When Mason smeared chocolate on his shirt, Mom laughed instead of scolding him. It was small, but it felt like progress. Amanda didn't come. She'd texted earlier, saying she was busy, though I noticed she hadn't been reaching out much at all lately. I figured she didn't like the shift in dynamic. For the first time, Mom's attention wasn't orbiting around her. A few nights later, Mom called me again. She said she'd been thinking about doing a family dinner, inviting everyone to start fresh. I hesitated, but she said she'd understand if I wasn't ready. That part, the understanding, was new. When I hung up, I sat with it for a while. The idea scared me, but also, it didn't feel impossible anymore. So I said yes. The dinner was set for the following Saturday. I was nervous the entire week. Mason was excited, mostly because Grandma had promised to make her chocolate cookies again. When we arrived, the house was full. Amanda and her husband were already there with their kids. The atmosphere was polite, cautious, everyone trying too hard not to say the wrong thing. Mom moved between rooms, making sure everyone had what they needed. At one point, I caught her watching me and Mason together, smiling softly like she was seeing something new. Dinner went better than I expected. No sharp comments, no passive jabs, just conversation. Light, careful, but civil. But near the end, Amanda brought up Disney again. She mentioned planning another trip sometime next year, and said maybe this time Mason could come too. Her tone was casual, but her eyes flicked toward me, testing. Mom spoke before I could. She said, "If we go again, everyone gets a ticket. No exceptions." Then she looked at me and smiled. Amanda laughed awkwardly, tried to shrug it off, but the message was clear. Mom wasn't going to pretend anymore. After dinner, while the kids played in the yard, Mom and I stood at the sink washing dishes together. She said quietly, "I can't fix everything, but I can stop pretending nothing happened." I told her that was all I ever wanted. When we left, Mason hugged her so tight she laughed. She told him to save her a seat at his next art show. Driving home, he said it felt like old times, but nicer. I knew exactly what he meant. That night, after putting him to bed, I stood in the kitchen for a while, letting the quiet settle in. It wasn't the kind of silence that came from being ignored. It was peace. Real peace. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need to prove anything to them anymore. Because somewhere between losing my family and finding my voice, I'd built something better, something that finally felt like mine. A few months later, life had settled into a rhythm that felt almost unfamiliar in its calm. No sudden tension, no half-meant apologies, just a slow, steady normal. Mom's health improved, and she started taking short walks every morning with Dad. Sometimes she'd call afterward to tell me what she'd seen, birds, clouds, small things she used to overlook. Mason loved those calls. He'd tell her about his drawings, and she'd listen like every line mattered. I didn't realize how much those small, consistent gestures were healing us until one afternoon when I found Mason at the kitchen table, making a card. He said it was for Grandma. Inside, in uneven letters, he'd written, "Thank you for seeing me." I had to step into another room to keep from crying. Amanda was still distant. We talked, but it was surface level. Updates, photos of the kids, polite questions. Sometimes she'd slip a small jab into conversation, testing old boundaries. I didn't bite anymore. The part of me that used to flinch or over-explain was gone. In July, Mom invited us all for a barbecue. It was hot, humid, the kind of day when everything feels sticky and slow, but it was good. Mason played with his cousins. Mom stayed mostly seated, smiling, watching. When she caught my eye across the yard, she mouthed, "Thank you." Later, when most people had gone inside, she came to sit next to me on the porch. She said she'd been thinking about how fast time was moving, how strange it felt that Mason was already growing so tall. Then she said something I never expected to hear. "I used to think being a good mother meant never admitting weakness," she said. but I see now it just made me cold. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, because the truth of it was too heavy for words. She went quiet for a moment, then added, "You broke that cycle. I hope you know that," and I did know. Finally. That night, when Mason and I got home, I tucked him into bed and sat by his side longer than usual. He asked if we could go back to the beach again before school started. I told him yes, definitely. After he fell asleep, I stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street. For so long, I'd been waiting for my family to change before I could feel whole. But now, watching Mason sleep, I realized I didn't need that anymore. The past wasn't gone. It still lived in pieces of me, in the way I sometimes braced for disappointment. But it didn't control me. It didn't define what kind of parent I got to be. Mom and I were still rebuilding, brick by brick, both careful not to promise more than we could give, and that was enough. The next weekend, Mason and I packed our bags and drove back to that same little coastal town. We found the same diner, the same faded motel with blue doors. On the beach, he ran ahead of me, his laughter rising above the sound of the waves. When he turned back and waved, I waved too. Not to call him back, but to tell him he was free to run as far as he wanted, because that's what I'd learned to do too.